Okay, so now we want to set this up for post-processing. And I went back, after the last video, I made, went back to some of the original parameters we had. So I went back to these 6.65, 912, 0.54. Just leave that on screen for a second so you can pause it in case you want to follow along with exactly what I have. And the other thing I'm going to do now is turn off that preview. Don't need to see that. And we're going to set this pattern that we've got here into 8.5 by 11 page size. And we're going to print this. We're going to print our results directly out of Rhino. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of focus in on this area. Here's the result of the rotation. So this is what we're working with. And I'm going to need to put a bounding box around this. So I'm just going to double click in here, type in bounding box. Sorry, I don't remember where this is exactly, so we'll just type in bounding box, and then we want to right click on that and make that a union box, and then we want to right click on C and flatten that input so that we only end up with one overall box surrounding all of the objects. And we can turn off that preview. We don't need to see the box itself. What we're trying to do is just find the center point, so that we can always center our pattern in the print. So I'm going to go to Surface, Area, and click right, and go ahead and drop that B output into the input here, and it'll give us the center point of our pattern, which we can also turn the preview off for. And now what I'm going to do is draw a rectangle, from that center point. So I'm going to go to Curve, Primitive, Rectangle, and I'm going to just type in. It's a little faster sometimes to do this instead of setting up domains. Just going to use a panel and just type in negative 4.25 to 4.25, and that's going to center a rectangle that's 8.5 inches wide. And we could double click that and then change this to negative 5.5 to 5.5, which will give us 11 inches tall. And the box now represents the outer edges of our 8.5 by 11 sheet. So this is not something we're going to print, but we're going to use it as a way, as some visual feedback here as we make changes to the pattern. For example, if I made a change to the spacing, you can see that I'm going to run out of space pretty quickly in terms of, printing real estate. The size of that box doesn't change. That's still 8.5 by 11, but the pattern is changing, and I'm going off the page. And I'm also probably getting a little bit too close here. It's probably going to crop off when I print it. Plus, I don't have any space for a name. So this will give you some idea for where your pattern is sitting on the page, and I'd say you want to kind of try to keep it so that there's some white space around it. I think this looks a lot better. It'll print just fine, and we have a little spot here down here for a name, which we're going to work on next. Okay. Okay, so let's head back over here. And what I want to now do is just find the corner points of this square. So I'm just going to head off to Curve, and then over here in Analysis, grab the Discontinuity component, which is going to give us our corner points. And I just want to isolate two of them because I only need two opposing points to set a print window to the right size. So I could turn these off, as a matter of fact, and head off to Set, List Item. The first one is going to be down here, and then zoom in. You can output all four if you like. We're only going to need outputs I and 2. So I'm going to turn off that preview, grab a point parameter from the Parameters tab, and just hold Shift down there and put both of these points into a point parameter so that I can see the 2 points that I'll actually bake into Rhino when I'm ready, so I can properly set my print window. using those 2 points to snap to. Okay. And you can turn this off if you like. It doesn't really matter. You can keep it on, you can turn it off. I'll leave it on. Okay, the last thing we want to do now is just set a location for our text, which is going to be our name. And what we're going to do is go over to transform and move. We're going to move the first point, which is that one in the lower left corner. And then I'm going to head over to parameters, input, and multi-directional slider, which is this little MD slider here. And I like to minimize that in size. And just plug that into the T input here. And now I can, this is kind of nice, you can kind of move this around within a preset or a custom domain. And the domain maximum here is 1 and 1, which is more than enough for us, so I'm just going to leave that alone. And I'm going to set that point to 0.35 and 0.35. Something like that. And that's going to be the bottom left point that will justify our text against. And then we can go to display. We're going to grab this text tag 3D. That's going to be the location of our text. We can turn that point off now. The text itself, let's grab a parameter and a panel, and you can type in your name. And just plug that in, and it's going to be a little bit large there. Let's set the size using another panel to something really little, like 0.065. So everyone should use the same size. Let's use this. This is roughly a 1/16 of an inch. Very small point size because I don't want it to overpower the graphic. It should just be a reference. And the rest we can leave alone. The justification and color is fine. Bottom left justification is good. But you could experiment with that. You could do bottom center just to give it a sense, but obviously now we're too close. But just so you see what they do. So keep it at bottom left. That makes this easier to use because this is the that point there, right at the bottom of the text. Okay, now we're ready to start the baking process and a little bit of post-processing in Rhino, which we'll go over next. So let's get started on that. The first thing we need, of course, is sorry. So I don't get confused, I'll leave that out. The first thing we need is our graphic, so I'll right-click on the rotate and bake that into a layer, and I'll bake it on the default layer for now. A helpful thing to have, of course, is our corner point, so I'm going to bake that onto a different layer. Put it on layer 4. You can put it on whatever layer you like. And then bake the text. So let's bake that as well. And we're going to change the colors of these layers anyhow, so I'm just going to put that on layer 2. Okay. And now what we're going to want to do is just go over here to the top right and just click this little green cylinder. And that's going to turn off any previewing in Grasshopper so that we can just shut that down for a minute. So we can minimize that and start the next step. So let's go over to our layers. I'm going to change layer 2. And the first thing I'm going to do is just type in purge. We have a few things on some layers, some empty layers. I like to get rid of empty layers so I don't get confused when I'm renaming. So as you purge, it just gets rid of all the stuff that doesn't have, all the data that doesn't have any actual drawn geometry on it. And you can see now that our layers are a little cleaner. And I'll just rename this pattern, stay organized, name or text, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it text. Oops. There we go. And then these are our print points in green. And then, I'm going to make this text black because I'd like it to print black. I'm going to lock that layer, both of these layers. I'm going to start getting to work on this pattern, and I'm going to set up a new layer temporarily and make that layer red. Okay. What I'm going to do is take all this stuff in here, type in intersect. That's going to give me a bunch of points. What we can now do is type in split. The objects we want to select is going to be the curve, so let's type in SEL-CRV. That's going to select all the curves. Hit enter or space. And now it's going to ask you for the cutting objects. Type in SEL-PT, select point. Selected all the points, and then hit enter. It split all of our curves into 948 pieces, so you can see now that all of these have been separated. Okay. The points now we no longer actually need. You can keep them if you like, maybe put them on a different layer. I'll throw them in a different layer. Normally I just delete these, but so let's select those points, drop them onto that layer, and then we'll turn it off. Okay. And what we're left with is all these little fragments. I'm going to turn off the gumball down here because that gets annoying when I'm selecting things sometimes. And now it's time to figure out what it is you want to make the pattern out of. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and select these objects, and I'm just holding the shift key here and selecting across, just take the things that I want. There's a little bit of manual labor here, but it's not too bad. So that's one set of it. Now I need the other set, which is the vertical set. So I'll kind of zoom in a little bit there and then do the same thing. Oops. Let's try to... Unfortunately, I'm going to have to... Yeah, I made a mistake. So I'm going to restart. Okay, almost good with that set. And more tricky set is these vertical ones. And you can start to see the pattern emerging a little bit there in the yellow selection. Pretty nice. And all the stuff in the middle, we can save that for a different kind of pattern if we like, or we can delete it. I can show you that in a second. Okay, now that we've got that selected, what I want to do is type in join before I touch anything else. And then I want to put all this stuff on its own layer so that we can always select it really quick. So I'm just going to turn that onto that layer 2, that red layer, and then we can rename that, P1. And then we can lock that layer down or turn it off to continue. And just to give you some idea for what I'm talking about when I say things like, have a separate pattern emerge from this, I'm going to, and this is not mandatory for everyone, but just as an example, I'm going to take all these outer curves here, and I'm going to delete these because they kind of end the system, and I kind of want it to appear like it could continue off the page. And now what we're left with is these ones in between here, which we can now join. And either put these on a separate pattern or leave it. And then I'm going to make one more layer here and call it hatch to stay organized, and leave that black. And I'm going to lock the pattern down and turn on the red ones. Okay, and select just the red ones and hatch that. And what comes up is this here. Make it solid. Done. We can turn off those lines, and these lines, and the pattern reveals itself. And then when it comes to printing, we type in print. Okay. Let me actually do that one more time. I'm going to bring this over here so you could see stuff. Okay. We can make a PDF or send it right to a plotter, whichever you prefer. I'll make a PDF for now. Size 8.5 by 11, portrait, yes. Vector, yes. All of this is good. Let's go to view and output scale. Top viewport, yes. Here we want to set the window, and here's where you can click on these points that we baked earlier. Now that that window is defined, you hit enter, and you can see now that it's nice and centered. And that's because we have this all correct. So scale to fit, let's make that 1:1. And that made a slight adjustment. So that's 1:1, 1:1. And margins and position should already be set to centered, which is good. So you can go ahead and click print, name it something, and hit save. And now that PDF is on my desktop. You can take a look at right here. And there's the printable graphic. Okay. And while we're working on this, we can look at the alternative to this pattern. So for that, I'm going to turn this on, turn the hatch off, and turn that pattern on as well. But I'm going to lock the red lines so I don't select them. I'll hatch these like this. And then the red ones, maybe we'll do something. So this shows us the in-betweens, you know, behind. So it's the kind of inverse of the last pattern that we just drew. And here's where we'll change a line type. And for the sake of drawing this out, or previewing it on my screen so that I can see how it might actually draw, I'm going to make this black. I'm going to change the line type to a dash line. But actually what I want to do is customize that dash line. So one thing we can do is head off to File, Properties, in Line Types. We can make a new one, so we can hit Add down here. And let's click up top here and call this something. Custom dash 1, I guess. And this is where you can set the pattern. So we'll make this 0.035 comma 0.035. So what that means is it'll draw a dash at that length, the first number, and then it'll have a space at the next number, and that will repeat. You can customize this any way you want. You can make this a little bit longer, for example, so that the space is a little bit bigger than the dash itself. I'm just guessing that this will work. You can also work in millimeters. It depends on how you want to. But since I'm in inches, it seems to make a little more sense. And then I'm just going to hit OK. And now I'm going to change my P1 layer here, the line type, to the custom dash 1, which will now appear. And we can see the effects of that. And maybe that's not exactly right. You know, maybe there's too much space. So we can go back and we can make some adjustments to fix that. Just a second. So let's maybe make an adjustment there. We'll head up to, go back to the Properties menu, grab our custom dash, and maybe just reduce the size a little. See how that looks. And we have to refresh it, so you reselect it, and you can see that it's been refreshed, and that's getting there. Not bad. I think we can do a little better. I'm going to make one more adjustment. Let's see. Try something like that. Hit OK, and then reselect it. Yeah, that's getting pretty clean. Cool. Great, and we can reprint that to a PDF. You don't have to give us more than one. I'm just giving you a couple different options here. Looks like our window is still set pretty nice. Yeah, everything should be fine. So we can line types and line widths. Oh yeah, we forgot to set our line. Let's see how this comes out. I mean, it's going to come out as a hairline in this case. Let's see how that looks. And of course, a test print will reveal other things, but yeah, that's going to be pretty light. So we're going to make a quick change there and change our print width to, let's say, 0.18. Reprint that. We can just save over that. Yes. And there you go. That's a little bit better. Cool. Open up the other one. You can kind of see what we've done here. Create a couple different options. One reveals the logic. The other one hides the logic so that we can get a kind of transformation. A shift in our perception between what's figure and what's ground. So here, sometimes you might read the in-between as this kind of, let's say, a grid in this direction with these kind of holes. Or you might read it as these as the objects, which transform in their shape from being like an eye-like shape all the way down to almost like a line and then back again. You may also read these as kind of squares that are rotated that then blend into being lines, you know, more like kind of an X or a crossing. Yeah, there's different ways, I think, to, you know, interpret that. But in any case, because the logic is not revealed, you end up with a kind of a really nice effect just from something quite straightforward. You know, just being able to control an array of objects and their rotation values. Okay, we'll head off to another example in the next part.